Welcome to the Kaiser Report. I'm Max Kaiser. It's the last contango in London, but no butter is being used this time. Even if an investor lives 200 frickin' years, he'll never discover the vampire squid's true nature. An investor may be able to understand the secrets of the Fibonacci analysis, but he or she will never understand the truth about Goldman Sachs' tentacles of fraud and deception. Never, 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 Stacy.
Max Kaiser. Matt Taibbi is out with another piece, and it features prominently Goldman Sachs. And this is the headline: "The vampire squid strikes again, the mega bank's most devious scam yet." Banks are no longer just financing heavy industry, they are actually buying it up and inventing bigger, bolder, and scarier scams than ever. Now, this is the fallout from the Financial Services Modernization Act of 1999, also known as the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act. Now, that overturned Glass-Steagall, of course, but it also legalized new forms of monopoly, allowing banks to merge with heavy industry. A tiny provision in the bill also permitted commercial banks to delve into any activity that is, quote, complementary to a financial activity. Now, at the time that this was pushed, it was first pushed by J.P. Morgan, and they said in congressional testimony, they compared this complementary financial activity to something like American Express, which publishes the Travel and Leisure magazine. It would just be something like that, just complementing each other.
Well, we've seen this relationship between banks and heavy industry for a while in the oil industry. So the oil industry, which is capital intensive, they borrow lots and lots of money, and to the point where the U.S. dollar, for example, is collateralized by oil. You know, starting in the 1970s, when the U.S. went off the gold standard and they went on the petrodollar, you see that the dollar, the U.S. dollar, is now backed by oil, and that's a merging, really, of heavy industry and currency manipulation and Wall Street debt creation. But what this Goldman Sachs Matt Taibbi piece is talking about is really the financialization of every single aspect of all industry into nothing more than a way for banks to crank out more ever complicated financial widgets that are meant to destroy the economy, the host in which this parasite lives. So Goldman Sachs, the parasite, has been given more leeway to burrow ever deeper into the host, being the U.S. and the global economy. And no one has stood up to the parasite.
Well, the banks in particular that benefited most from this are Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and J.P. Morgan Chase. And he says regarding the oil industry, for example, this is just how deep the tentacles go. But banks aren't just buying stuff. They're buying whole industrial processes. They're buying oil that's still in the ground, the tankers that move it across the sea, the refineries that turn it into fuel, and the pipelines that bring it to your home. Then, just for kicks, they're also betting on the timing and efficiency of these same industrial processes in the financial markets, buying and selling oil stocks on the stock exchange, oil futures on the futures markets, swaps on the swaps market, etc. So there's a wholesale merger of banks and heavy industry. They control the entire process, much like, we saw that back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, didn't we, with communism also control the entire process.
Right. I mean, it is a command and control, state-run, corrupt, fascist dictatorship. Full stop. I mean, that's a given. But what it does to the economy as a whole and the ecology as a whole. Remember that ultimately the collateral for the global economy is the ecology. Oil being a finite resource, Goldman Sachs and others have figured out a way to sell forward 100 years, 200 years, 300 years worth of oil, of energy resources, bring all that income into the present, put it into their pockets, and then sit back while we have a credit collapse and a peak oil situation emerge, and you have this massive inequality that has resulted from one bank working with others to bring into the present hundreds of years worth of income that would have been used to keep generations of Americans and people around the world alive. So they're basically stealing not only from everyone around the world today, but they figured out a way to steal from billions of people in the future.
Well, so because these guys control everything, from the swaps market betting on the future outcome of oil production, but they also control the production. They always win. So, for example, they talk about arbitraging the contango. Now, remember back in 2009, early in the days of the financial crisis, remember we talked about contango and this oil contango. Well, the futures market was pricing oil much higher than it was today. Now, what happened there? It was because one of the participants in this was Koch Industries, and they had bought up cheap oil, put it onto tankers, controlled the supply, made it seem scarce, and they were also controlling the futures market and selling it for much more in the future, but driving up the price of oil. They say it was up to 20 to 30% more because of this arbitraging the contango.
Right. Well, this is where, let's say, Lloyd Blankfein runs Goldman Sachs. It should not be lauded as a good businessman or a financial wizard in some way, because as you're pointing out here, using these financial products and financial futures markets, they have eliminated all risk of stealing money from the future. So stealing money from the present, stealing money from the future, and abusing markets to make the risk of stealing this money zero. At least with somebody who is breaking into your home, stealing all of your jewelry and running away, there is a risk that they might get caught, they might get beat up, they might go to jail. But when Goldman Sachs breaks into your home, steals all of your goods and services and capital, essentially using all of his financial futures products, and then runs away without taking any risk, and then your kids end up having nothing to eat. They starve to death. Talk about crystal knock, Tom Perkins. Talk to Lloyd Blankfein about his crystal knock on your people. Okay? That's the guy you should be talking to. It's no risk capitalism, which of course is not capitalism at all. It's just theft.
So these banks have taken control of the entire industrial process. Now, even the architect of this legislation, Jim Leach, who's now a professor, and he was a Republican congressperson at the time on the Financial Services and Banking Committee. He's shocked, he says, that they're doing this, that he didn't know that's what complementary financial activities meant. He thought it was just like these magazines that American Express has released. But also in 2012, the New York Fed also released a paper saying that they don't really know what it means, and it's quite ambiguous what that means. But there's another clause inside that 1999 Financial Services Modernization Act, and that is that any company that became a bank holding company after the passage of Gramm-Leach-Bliley in 1999 could engage or control shares of a company engaged in commodities trading, but only if it was already doing so before a seemingly arbitrary date in 1997. So if you became a bank holding company after 1999, because nobody understood why this phrase was in there, what this clause even meant, until, lo and behold, the 2008 financial crisis, Goldman Sachs became a bank holding company overnight. So did Morgan Stanley. And lo and behold, they could start buying up the entire industrial processes.
Yeah, I mean, you've got Jamie Dimon and Lloyd Blankfein committing, engaging in, partaking in, colluding in a scheme that is bankrupting the economy and creating multiple generations of disenfranchised, angry citizens, while the rights of these citizens are being stripped to pay for this fraud. So what do you do about this? I mean, how do you react? I noticed, for example, there's no connection, from what I understand, but up to 20 bankers have recently been found dead. That's a fact. We've got the 4 or 5 known examples of banker suicides, and we've got reports now that up to 20 bankers have been found dead. So either A, these are bankers who were going to blow the whistle on Lloyd Blankfein, and he had him taken out, or these are bankers who have committed suicide because of the shame of being associated with Lloyd Blankfein. Imagine you're associated with Lloyd Blankfein and you know that your boss is committing a financial holocaust. Would you not be tempted to kill yourself? Is this not behind the rash of banker suicides around America and around the world? I think that's the cause.
So let's go back to the story, because he mentions that, for example, we're still far behind in even trying to chase the frauds that previously happened, the earlier frauds from the mortgage-backed securities fraud, and now there's a LIBOR and Forex trading fraud. These are all these new frauds coming up. So he mentions the arbitrage and the contango in oil. Then he mentions the aluminum, or aluminium as they call it in the UK, where Goldman Sachs controlled the Detroit aluminum. Something like 70% of the market all went through there. But what they were doing was swapping it back and forth between warehouses, raising the rents and charging a huge amount more for this aluminum. Now, there's a class action suit going on against Goldman Sachs for their role in the aluminum rigging. By the way, they're all getting out of the markets now that they've already, the frauds are catching up to them and they've already defrauded the entire market. But Garrett Watkins, an Arizona-based class action attorney who is suing Goldman Sachs and others over the aluminum case on behalf of two major manufacturers, puts it this way. It's like that line in The Dark Knight Rises, he says, the storm isn't coming, the storm is already here. So what was that whole Dark Knight Rises but about? They were demonizing Occupy Wall Street as if they wanted to bring anarchy and chaos. And yet, what he's rightly pointing out here is this manipulation of the entire industrial process. The entire industrial process, from beginning to end, is raising prices, causing chaos, and they're the ones causing the chaos and anarchy that the film industry imagined that the normal people are causing.
So this is a clear case of fascism. This is a clear case of a small group of people committing fraud on an industrial scale. And as a result, you've got wide-scale poverty, disease, ecological disaster. What is the solution? Because we were told after World War II, remember, never again was the catchphrase after World War II. Never again would we see a Holocaust like World War II. And yet, we're seeing it again. So why aren't the people being more proactively trying to stop it? Why aren't the folks who were the victims last time saying, you know what, we don't want this again? It puts into context the whole past 70 or 80 years of who's doing what to whom for what and for how much.
Now, also, the point here is that, the financial collapse happened, and because of that, Goldman Sachs became a bank holding company, and because of the cheap 0% interest rates, they could buy up all these commodity warehouses. They also point out that the LME, the London Metals Exchange, is also being bought up by Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and Glencore and Trafigura, which were both rich firms. Remember the famous market manipulator who went on the run, and Bill Clinton, also, who oversaw the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act? He pardoned him. So they control the London Metals Exchange with zinc, copper, aluminum. The same thing is happening there. He's talking about the merry-go-round there. You're seeing signs of merry-go-round because you see over and over the cancel of the warrant, which is showing that there's a rise in manipulation, basically. It could be a sign of that.
Well, Matt Taibbi, another great job, another great article, really covering this ongoing scourge of terrorism, and he does a good job. Anyway, we got to go. Stacey, thanks so much.
The last contango in London.
Indeed, no butter for you. Stay tuned for the second half, a whole lot more.